Welcome to our Lucky Creations Week. We are working on projects for St. Patrick's Day. And if you are not a big celebrator of St. Patrick's Day, well, then all things green. So you can think of it as kind of that ode to spring. If we ever find spring here in the Midwest, we're in the middle of a blizzard today. So travel not advised. And for those of you without power, I'm hoping that you have enough power on your phone or that you can live stream us that way. We have it's about 4 inches of snow outside, and I'm thinking green because I need that promise of spring coming. And St. Patrick's Day is always kind of that mark on the calendar that makes me think, ooh, everything will turn green. So we are doing Clover Takeover for our project in this event. If you haven't already downloaded the pattern, the QR code here will pop up. Thanks for my admin person helping out here, my tech person in the background, because I could not do this without them. That QR code, if you just take your phone camera over that, it'll take you right to the link that'll get you to probably enter your email so we can make sure we stay in contact with you for all the wonderful events that we have. And then you can get to the pattern for a free download of the pattern. And if you haven't done that yet, grab something to take a few notes on so that you can get all the tips and tricks of putting together our fun little table topper today. That being said, there are a lot of really fun novelty fabrics out there that you can use, or you can just simply pick some shades of green, which is what I had done in the original. The medium green here is actually a batik fabric, and it had kind of a leafy, flowery look to it. So it gave me the texture I was looking for, but wasn't a really bold print. But I have some other options. So as we make our project, we'll make a completely different version of this. The background, instead of going to a really light white on white kind of thing, I picked what actually is a very, very light green. And it's a green on green. I know that might be hard to find, so I'll show you an option that uses a little bit more busy fabric. And then I think this one is just a shadow play. It's a very popular tone on tone dark green to use for the heart shapes of the clovers and the binding that kind of finishes off that outer edge. Now, when you look at the yardage for this, you're going to see that it takes about a third of a yard of each of the three fabrics. I do have, and that includes binding in one of them. So you have a light, a medium, and a dark that gets you all the yardages. So it's about a yard of fabric to make this. And I didn't say I'm Colleen Tauke and I'm your instructor today. So if you haven't joined in one of our live events, then you know who is your instructor. Let us know where you're watching from, because we've got a whole bunch of people already popping in and saying hello. Faye is from Wildwood, I believe, Missouri. And I got to get in here a little, because Suzanne says hello from Spain. We are glad that our international quilters are joining us too. We've got Judith says hello from from Virginia. And Sonia says hello from New York. Kelly from Arizona. We'd love to see your names pop in here. Glenda is watching. Top of the morning to you. Yes, just a little bit Irish there. Actually, my ancestors are Irish, so this is a little closer to my heart. On my dad's side, we were Irish. Karen says hello from, it popped up on me, from Illinois. I love seeing all of your names pop in here. We've got somebody, it went from Denver. It popped up too far for me to read the rest of it. Anita says hello from Boulder City, Nevada. Judy's popping in from Snowflake, Arizona. Now, how appropriate is that I'm in the middle of a snowstorm or a blizzard and you're from Snowflake? Joy says good morning from Wyoming. So we are so glad that you're joining us. So it's fun to pop in and look at all the different places that, as quilters, I used to think that being a quilter was kind of in this unusual little group, and that there weren't very many other quilters out there. But by evidence of where you all live, sometimes somebody pop up and they're like in Ankeny, which is just down the road from me, or they're in 2 towns over. Or maybe I just get to realize that quilting is a universal language. Like when our quilters pop in from Spain or Norway or from the UK. So it's really fun to see, or Canada, because I see Lisa who's popping in from St. Thomas in Ontario, Canada. It's just nice to know that I'm not alone in the quilting world, and that quilting is something that we enjoy. We love to play with color, with fabric. It's our medium as artists. So when we get into making our project here, it's going to finish 20 by 20. So this is a small project. You can easily get this done before St. Patrick's Day actually rolls around. Or if you just want to do something for spring again, an easy to accomplish project, you might even be possibly giving it as a gift. So the other things that you need besides just your fabric and your batting and your backing, of course, your normal kind of quilting supplies, your rotary cutter, your mat, your ruler, and all those things. I do have spray-based as an option, and we will talk about that. Heat and Bond, which is the product that I like to use. And it's a little crunched up here, but I save every little piece because you just never know when availability might be short. So Heat and Bond, and I use the light version of Heat and Bond. It has paper on one side, it has the glue layer on the other, and I will do the appliques with those. There are Steam-A-Seam is another product out there. I'm sure there are others available, whatever is your favorite. I tend to go to the lightest version of that type of product because I don't want to add stiffness to my project. I want to be able to adhere the pieces so that I can do the stitching around the shapes so that it's a permanent fix and they are nice and trimmed out, but I don't want to add a lot of stiffness. So realize if you're new to quilting that the adhesive type thing that we use, that Heat and Bond or that Steam-A-Seam, comes in different weights. There are lights and there are medium weights, there are heavy weights, and there are some that are called no-sew. Don't pick those. And why do I know this? Because I've done it. Accidentally bought a package of no-sew, unbeknownst to me, was working on a project and could not figure out why my thread kept breaking until I looked back at the package and it said no-sew version, which means there's going to be a lot of adhesive and a lot of stickiness so that the needle cannot go down through that fabric without being shredded over just a few stitches. So stay away from that unless you just want to heat and bond it or fuse it down and not do any stitching. But remember, washing might be an issue. So just to let you know that there are different kinds of products out there. Sandy says hello from Apple Valley, California. Somebody else from Apple Valley that I know another person from Apple Valley. Wanda says hello from Michigan. Barb says hello from Ontario, Canada. Joanne says hello from Montreal. We are so glad that you're joining us. And I'm wondering if Katie and an Elliot are watching too. There's a little snowbound today because of no power. So I hope that you're watching and enjoying the project. We are going to then, once we have all of our supplies and our yardage figured out, and we finally settle on that fabric, I'm going to show you a couple of other options. We're going to put this up behind here so we can still reference it. Now, the project will have a template at the back for the clovers that we're going to create and the stem. So you kind of want to keep the size of that in mind when you go to select fabrics. And I told you that I can go crazy wild with fabric. And when I see something that's a holiday fabric, I always get a piece. So I'm going to do my project today with these big clovers so that we have a little bit more going on than just a tone-on-tone green. And I'm going to do this as my background. So it's a little tiny shamrock with a dot pattern on white. So that's going to be my light fabric in this project. And then because this includes a little black, but it has some dark green in it, I had a couple of options. I could do a dark green tone-on-tone, similar to the original. Then I thought maybe I want to go a little wild. So I pulled up a micro dot. This is black with a little tiny white dot on it. But then I pulled out this one. Well, this is a little bit large scale. So think about scale when you're picking your fabrics. The size of the dots is a little bit overwhelming to the size of the heart shapes. And it might not read quite the way I want. So when you go to pick out fabrics, always be thinking of the scale of the design. I love the dots, but maybe this is a little bit too much. Maybe keep that for another project and go with the tinier dots for mine, or they could be green. So let's see what we do here in this project. I'm going to keep all 4 of those fabrics together because I like the combination there. And we're going to do our cutting. Now, I did my cutting already, so I'm going to talk you through why, as you look at this, some people will say, well, isn't this just a giant varied 9 patch? It looks as if this is one large light square in the center, that I have 4 smaller squares on the outer corners, and that these are rectangles. Now, that is one way to cut it. But what I did was actually use 5.5-inch squares. So the whole thing is made out of squares. The reason being it takes less fabric. Because thinking about this as a 10.5-inch cut piece of fabric means you have to buy more fabric. Or maybe you have to find that bigger piece in your stash. And if you're like me, I have plenty of fabric, but I don't always have larger pieces. Sometimes I just have like a width of fabric left over from another project. And it might not be 11 or 12 inches wide in order for me to get that nice 10.5-inch square cut. So by using 5-inch squares, I can cut all of the pieces in here and I don't need as much yardage. So that's the reason. I'll say that's my justification for using 3rd yard strips of fabric. And it makes it a little bit, for some people, like, why would you do that? But when you see even larger prints put together, you'll notice that those seams just kind of disappear. Because that was one of my concerns, that if I were to cut up a larger print like this with those clovers, would it be really disruptive if I piece together 5-inch squares? So I have this part pieced already, because watching me sew a straight line is kind of silly for you to have to endure. So we're going to say hello to Susan from Kansas and Cindy from Missouri, Kansas City, Missouri. And Barb is saying, I'm making a split 9 patch, a St. Patrick's Day table topper. Just have to quilt it and bind it. That quilting and binding slows us down every time, but knowing you're getting close to the finish line is always a good thing. So I cut my 5.5-inch squares, and I went ahead, and what I'm having you do is create 4 patches. So you're going to create pieces like this. You're doing sets of 2 through the entire stack of 5-inch squares, and then creating 4 patches, and then arranging the 4 patches so that the lights all dance to the center. And you'll notice pretty much the seams just disappear. There's so much going on, you don't really see any disruption. If you'd like to cut your pieces the other way, you're always there's no obligation to cut it the way I did. But the 5.5-inch squares is how I started on mine. So this is the arrangement of the pieces with 4 of the lights in the center. We want our 4 lights in the outer corners because that's where we're going to put our applique. And we just have this fun dancing medium print there, so that we have that kind of the overall theme really screaming out at us at St. Patrick's Day. Okay, once you get to this point, it's time to prepare our applique pieces. So we're going to set this aside for just a moment, and we are going to work on doing our little applique shapes. Now, some of you have seen me use this before. This is simply a light board, an LED light board that you can find online, and it keeps me from having to stand at the window to trace my shapes onto my product. For years, I stood at the window and traced shapes and taped things to the window so that I could get my shape traced out there nicely. But having a light board, and a very small one, in fact, makes it very easy to store. And I don't have to stand at the window to do this anymore. So we have our shape, our hearts, and it tells you the heart shape that we're going to make the clovers. I'll tell you how many you need to trace of each of those. And then we take our product and a pencil or a pen, something that you can easily write on the paper side of your product. And we're simply going to trace the shape. And remember that as you trace, this is not the finished edge of your project. Tracing sometimes can be a little bit, I can be a little messy at it, but knowing that later I'm going to take a scissors and clean that up, then I know I just need the general shape of what I'm trying to get here. So I'm going to trace this out. There we go. And don't forget the stem pieces because we need those also. Now, to be totally honest with you, in full disclosure, the stems on my original project were done with a pre-cut bias or a pre-made bias strips quite a few years ago. And I don't know for sure if that's still available anymore. It used to come on rolls. People used it for stained glass window quilts. Not cathedral window, stained glass. When they're putting pieces together and they were covering the cut edges with a black leading look fabric. It also came in green and other colors. And at the time I had that available and I just simply used links of that. But because that may not be available anymore, I gave you the template to create the stems also. And in this case, since I'm using the black dot, I want all of it to match. So I have traced out my shapes. They're not perfectly, the lines aren't perfect on those at this point. And we're going to apply that to the back side of our fabric and create the iron-on shapes that we want for our project. So I have another one here ready to go. And let's see, you got to make sure that my iron is hot. Now, whenever I trace shapes for applique, I use up as much of the product as possible. And you kind of saw me repositioning it as I was drawing. I don't want to just leave a big chunk of space between everything. I kind of nest all the pieces together so that I don't waste any product. It doesn't matter which direction they're going, unless you have a directional fabric, then you might want to be more aware of it. But because I'm using a micro dot, it's not really going to make any difference the positioning of the shapes. So in this product, the paper side up, I'm going to apply it to the wrong side of my fabric. I think my iron is hot and ready to go. Yep, it's warm. Now, remember to always read the instructions that come with your product so that you know how long to heat this to the back of the fabric and what the iron setting needs to be, because every product may be just a little bit different. And if you overheat the product, which means if you heat this too long or too hot, this glue layer that's on the back side will actually just disappear into the fabric. It'll absorb all of the glue and not leave anything left to adhere to your table topper. And how do I know that? Because I've done that. And I couldn't figure out what I did. And then someone said, well, how long did you heat it? And I went, I'm not really sure. So read the instructions, make sure that you know how long to heat and not over heat the adhesive, because like I said, you will kill the glue and then it won't stick at all. So we've got this glue side to the wrong side of our fabric. I'm going to heat this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That should do it. Let's see. Oh, one edge didn't. Okay. Sometimes with cordless irons, you don't always have as even maybe of a sole plate heating. So know your iron on how long or where your warm spot is on it. And I did set it to, there we go. Make sure that it was good and hot. There we go. Now it's adhered to my fabric. Now this is where I'm going to take my scissors, and you can use Different people have different opinions. Sometimes people will say a long blade gives you a nicer, cleaner cut. Others will say they like to use their smaller, super sharp little scissors for cutting out applique pieces. That's a personal choice. I kind of like the long blade effect because I do understand that when you start and stop, you tend to get an elbow so that your curve isn't as smooth. So in this case, I'm starting at the point of the shape and give one nice long cut as far as I can with my blade. So I get that really smooth line. This is where you get the chance to clean up that maybe not so pretty tracing. This is not art class. This is an applique. So now I've cut out my little shape and then continue cutting out. Now, holding on to that whole piece at once, I tend to not enjoy. So I tend to chunk or bubble cut my pieces. I'll show you what I mean. I leave a margin around them so that I'm just holding one piece at a time. It's a little easier to maneuver as you cut out your shapes. And I have a set of those already cut out. Now, as I was working on this and making my shapes, I decided that maybe I would throw in one set in the green just for fun, because the novelty of the fabric I'm using, this one's a little more formal. This one is a little bit more on the let's have fun with this project because of all the different colors of the clover and the borders of this. So I may end up putting in a whole bunch of the black and then one in the dark green as the lucky clover. So have fun with your project. What you see doesn't mean that you have to make it exactly the same. Okay. It's a spur for creativity is what we're trying to create here. Wanda says, a beautiful sampler behind you. Yes, that was a project that was done during COVID when we did a virtual retreat years ago when we couldn't go to class anymore. So that was something that we offered a long time ago. So I might have to go back and create some a class or a project with that again, because that was a long time ago already. COVID seems like forever. Let's see. Barb says the pattern is so versatile. You could make hearts for Valentine's. Well, you've just caught on. I created this as I created one of these as just a one-off and then later created more. So I have St. Valentine's Day, St. Patrick's Day. I have one for the 4th of July. I have a Christmas one. I'm trying to remember if I ever made a Halloween version. I don't remember, but I have quite a there's one with teacups, I think, on it. So I've made a variety of these. So maybe coming to a live event near you will be some more shapes of different possibilities. Now, once you have all of your applique pieces cut out, it's just simply removing the backing paper side. If you're using heat and bond, if you're using other products, they work a little differently. The Steam a Seam has more of a tacky backing on it, and that you'll just read the instructions for using that one. That's a little bit different than the heat and bond version. So we have these little papers that come off the back side. Just a simple bend of the edge. If it's been heated properly, the paper should kind of start to separate from the adhesive, and then you simply pull it off. And then our tiny little stem. And as I was sitting here waiting to join all of you, I had thought about my where I wanted to place this. And I realized that when I was playing with it, that I positioned mine yesterday differently than the original. So Clover Takeover has more than one version. You could arrange your clovers. And let me see if I can get this laid out here in our space. You could do your clover facing the outer edge. That's an option because that's how I actually laid it out yesterday. And then I realized, oh, I had them all dancing in the center before. So personal choice, how you want to arrange your shapes to make your clover. They don't have to be perfect. Each of them can be unique. You don't need to measure every little tiny thing, because you know what? Every clover is unique in its creation. So they can be stem outward or they can be stem inward. I guess the idea on the original was that it kind of was a clover dance in a circle. So they were all coming together. But again, as you go to heat this in place, make sure, I'm not going to be able to move that without undoing everything. So it's nice sometimes to work at the ironing board or your pressing station, so that you don't have to shift everything once you have it in position. And I know that sometimes static electricity can cause issues especially with dry air in the wintertime, when you get your iron close to this, sometimes there's a static pull that may want to shift your pieces. So be very careful when you're putting all of your shapes together, so that when you actually get to fusing it in place, they don't all jump away from you. So come in and start to heat, kind of tacking that center, keeps it from shifting around. Just a little tap. And then knowing you have everything in place and nothing's going to move. Again, I've had that happen to me. And then it was like, I need to get that little piece back off. Sometimes you can reheat and pull a shape back, but sometimes the adhesive is too late and it's already down, which means you just recut a piece or a section and do a little replacement step. Now, once you get your shapes in place, how cute is that going to be? Then it'll be time to go in and do the stitching over that edge. Now, I want to bring in back our original here. I did a blanket stitch, buttonhole stitch. Some people call it by different names, over the edge of each of the shapes in the applique here. Now, you can do a buttonhole stitch, you could do a zigzag, you could do a straight stitch right near the edge. It really depends on your comfort zone, your style, how you want it to appear when it's finished. Now, in the instructions, I said pick your favorite. I forgot to put in the actual size of that stitch. So on my machine, and most machines now, you have kind of increments in millimeters. So mine is set at width and length, both are set at 3.0. So that means the width of the stitch and the distance between those little steps into the applique itself are 3.0 apart in spacing. You can play with that a little bit. The one thing that I usually end up having to do whenever I sit down to work on an applique is think about the size of the applique. You have to think about how narrow those stems are. And then I always do a little bit of a test. Now, I don't have an applique on this piece of fabric. I'm just doing a test to make sure that the width and length are good. So if it were wider, because the default is not 3.0 in either of those, the step might be too large or too big of a bite into my applique when it comes to that little tiny stem. And I may want my applique or my stitching to be consistent throughout. So it's always good to run just a little bit of a test to make sure that you are comfortable with the width and length of the stitch. Now, this is like a 4.0. This is a pretty wide step when you think about how small the stem is. So I will then, maybe I'll step it down to that 3.0 so you can tell the difference. That just seems like such a tiny step, but it's very noticeable in the bite into the actual applique, because that's going to trim out that edge and make it secure for long term. This project is, I dare to say, 10, 12, maybe 15 years old. And it looks the same as the day I made it, because the applique, that stitch over the edge really protects those applique edges. So the difference between a 4.0 and 3.0 is quite noticeable in the depth of the stitch. Now, I don't like to go too much shorter in the stitch, which means denser, bringing those steps together. I want the fabric to actually be visible between the steps. So 3.0 and 3.0 for width and length gives you a nice size. It's close enough together to get around corners. You might want to go a little shorter. It really depends on your comfort in doing the stitching around that edge. You're going to want to slow down as you get to curves. So I usually, because I'm one of those people that I don't practice it until I'm right in the middle of doing it. I tend to start at the point because I have a straightaway there, so I can kind of get comfortable for the speed control and where my needle is at, because I want that to drop off into the background but not stitch to be visible in the background. And then I get into my curve, so I have to slow down going around that curve. And I mean really slow. It's not a race. Then to get to the inside corner and then come back out really slow around that curve. And then that straightaway gives me that place to finish off where I can go a little bit faster. But maybe practice one or two of these shapes on a scrap fabric before you jump into your project if you're new to applique and doing that stitching on the outer edge. It'll give you the confidence that you need to drive those curves. The other thing is that thread color. On this one, the appliques are quite dark green, and I used a Kelly green thread. So it's visible just a bit on that edge. I don't know if the camera can actually pick it up or not, but thread color also is important when it comes to doing a raw edge applique. On this one, I will probably do black because I really don't need it to show. It just needs to go into the background. I mean, it's like I need it to be the same color as my applique. So I'll probably just use black on something like this. But you could, if you wanted to use green, you could. Using something daring like white will show every stitch. And then it makes it one of those things where you're looking at the stitching instead of the fun of the project. So really think about the color of the thread you use before you jump in to do that outer edge stitch. If you use steam a seam bar basques, the light, they will stick to the topper without an iron. True. Steam a seam has that paper layer on both sides. You draw on one side, you cut out your you adhere it to your, stick it to your fabric, cut out your shapes, take away that second paper layer, and it will temporarily stay in place. So it doesn't do that little jump of static. It has a kind of a tackiness, almost like a Post-it note on the backside. So that is a product that some people enjoy using, and Steam a Seam is readily available along with Heat and Bond, even online or at your local quilt shops. Those big box stores are getting harder and harder to find, so online shopping for some of those products may be your place of choice for purchase. Now, the quilting is the last. Quilting and binding are always the last thing that slow us down on finishing a project. On this one, because this was a number of years ago, my design of choice was just a meander. So I used a cream color thread. So cream color doesn't show up a lot because it was a very fine thread on the green itself. And then I didn't have to change colors for the background behind the clovers themselves. Now, if I were going to actually quilt this today, I would have started in a little bit different manner. I would have done stitch in the ditch between the different sections here to hold that in place. And then I would have gotten a little cleaner line in my piecing, but hindsight's 2020. And, you know, years ago, I didn't know that stitching in the ditch is actually a good technique. It helps keep the piecing to look nice and sharp before you go in to do your quilting. I would also have probably done a really close stitching around each section of the clovers. Again, it's just one of those things you learn along as you go along. But the meander was a totally fine, acceptable, I believe, as a quilting technique here, because the clover and all your applique is the real highlight of this project. So Clover Takeover really becomes the focus. I am so glad that you joined me today. Clover Takeover, what is a fun project to do, very quick, a great introduction to machine applique if you haven't done a lot of machine applique, and um, a place that you can kind of get your feet wet, experiment, have some great success, and have a fun project when you're done. So thanks for joining me.